Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, especially with the time difference. So I'm going to hand it over to you now and I'm going to mute myself. Welcome, Jess.
Thanks, Sheila. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. So I'm going to be looking up because I have a separate screen up here, so bear with. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking to everyone about civets and the work that the Civet project is doing. So the first thing first, who are civets? When I say civets, I am broadly talking about all members within the Viveridae family. So our small carnivores endemic to Africa and Asia. They are amongst the most ancient of our cat-like animals to still walk the planet. They include our wonderful civets, our binturongs, genets, and oyons. So when I say civets, I'm referring to broadly all of those species. Now, civets are poorly researched. They are primarily solitary, nocturnal, arboreal. These are all characteristics that make them quite difficult to study in the wild. Unfortunately, as well, the IUCN Red List for all of viverids at the moment is outdated and currently only includes 33 of the 36 species. That is because there is very few people actually studying these animals. They tend to appear as kind of bycatch and, you know, as a kind of secondary mention in publications rather than having specific studies looking at them. And because of that, it means that we have a lot of unknowns. So there's a lot of knowledge gaps that we want to fill. One really great opportunity for people interested in viverids, though, is that they are housed widely around the world. Binturong are found pretty much in every country with zoos, but in my experience, one of the reasons why I wanted to work with viverids is, so my background is actually zookeeping. It was always disappointing to go to zoos and see viverid collections, and the signage was always quite basic. It was usually fun facts like civets smell like popcorn and they're vulnerable on the endangered list, but there was never really any kind of threat analysis that would help a visitor understand how they're connected to these species and how they could make a difference. Now, the really big threat to civets that most people have at least heard of is civet coffee. And unfortunately, there are many different species of civets which are collected from the wild and used to produce civet coffee. It's also known as coffee luwak or cappuccino. It's coffee that has been eaten, digested, and then excreted by civets. Now, there are known animal welfare implications for this practice. Animals are housed in really poor conditions, fed a high caffeine diet. You can imagine that the welfare is not going to be easily met. There's also lesser known conservation impacts, but also public health concerns as well. Civets were the carriers of SARS that killed 774 people across 29 countries back in 2024, and that was the predecessor of COVID. So handling a product that comes from these animals' feces is a biohazardous activity that we really ought to be problematizing. So the Civet Project is a charitable organisation registered in the UK, but we work globally. We are the only organisation in the world that's exclusively dedicated to all viverid species. We have a really broad mission, and that's to protect the welfare and the conservation of all viverids. We were established as a registered charity in late 2023, so 2024 was our first full year. In that year, we launched our 5-year strategy and we had 3 main objectives. The first was that we really wanted to raise the profile of civet species. So we wanted to make people fall in love with these animals because people can only do that if they know they exist. So we launched World Civet Day. This takes place on the 4th of April every year to try and get civets into the public knowledge, public sphere. We also wanted to build capacity in civet range countries, so we started partnering with sanctuaries and zoos all over the world and helping them to care for their civets and to educate their visitors and the local communities where civets are also living. And then the third part was we wanted to launch a documentary that really did delve into the nuances of civet coffee, but specifically civet coffee tourism. And hopefully, all being well, I'll be able to play you that film today. It's 30 minutes, and I'm going to rush through these slides so we can definitely fit it in. So how did it go? By 2025, our documentary had been released. It had won 3 industry awards. World Civet Day had reached 40,000 people. And we had also started to fill some of those nitty-gritty scientific knowledge gaps. So we established the IUCN SSE Small Carnivore Specialist Group's Civet Working Group. Such a mouthful. But this brought together 23 experts from civet range countries primarily, but also from institutions around the world that were doing ex situ conservation. This allowed us to really strategically drive conservation objectives for viverids. And that's really what was needed because they tended to be that forgotten group. We also hosted the first ever zoo viverid conference at a zoo here in the UK. That brought together 20 European collections, 1 from America, and then we also dialed in lots of colleagues and field researchers from across Asia and Africa. So we had a really nice knowledge exchange between in situ and ex situ conservation for viverids. By the end of the year, we had published 2 industry leaders' reports. So we had one that came from our documentary film about civet coffee tourism, and the other was looking at the ways that civet coffee is marketed to consumers. And this is something we're still working on at the moment because we have found that civet coffee retailers are often citing animal welfare organizations and creating fake certificates saying that their civet coffee comes from the wild. So we know that there's a lot of fraud that's happening in this industry. We also brought together 200 NGOs from across the world in a joint call to governments to increase the protection for civets and consumers through ethical coffee practice. And we managed to raise the profile of our viverids by having international press coverage looking at this issue of the world's most expensive coffee. So this year we are going bigger and better. So World Civet Day is now a regional approach. So it's happening in 2 days. It's a very busy week. So on the 4th of April, we are celebrating World Civet Day, and our theme this year is Healthy Civets, Healthy Planet. So we are really showcasing all the ways that civets keep the environment healthy. So we talk to school children about the seed dispersal powers of viverids. We let them know about how they keep pest control. They offer that as a kind of ecological service. But when we exploit civets, that's when we have the opposite and we have disease emergence. So we've already got 40 zoos around the world taking part in World Civet Day. We'll probably have a few more on the day. We also have 15 organisations in civet range countries, so that's conservation field research stations all the way through to sanctuaries and rescue centres. And we have a regional approach because the way that human activity is impacting viverids really depends on where you are in the world. So we've designed resources for Africa that talk about the zoonotic issues with bushmeat trade. And then in Asia, we have a pack that's more designed for luxury meat and civet coffee. Then, of course, we have our kind of Western pack, which is for zoos that aren't in a civet range country, but they do have viverids in their collections. So we are also this year working on red listing assessments, and we launched the iNaturalist Night Roamers project. So this is a global data set. We knew that there were camera traps being set all over Civet range countries looking for other species. So we knew that there was, for example, a huge project looking at tigers, and civets were being captured on those camera traps. But that data was just being discarded. So we set up the Night Roamers project on the iNaturalist database. This is a free service. It can act as citizen science, and it also allows organizations to upload their bycatch. I checked this morning. We have over 11,000 data sets for vivrids that span their range. This makes it the largest database in the world for vivrids. And that data is now being channeled through our Civet working group in the IUCN for those red listing assessments. So finally, we're able to start filling some of those scientific gaps. We also have commissioned a special issue of the Small Carnivore Conservation Journal called Viveridae. If anyone on the call is looking at research of their vivrids in their collections, we would love to have articles that include ex situ conservation as well. And we have had 5 official partners. So thanks to our partners, and this is a really exciting one because this was funded exclusively by 3 of some of the smallest zoos in the UK. We have been able to launch what we're calling our Civet One Health initiative. And this is a program to tackle the commercial trade of civets in Vietnam. This project has come from the documentary that I'm going to screen with you today. Through zoo funding, we have been able to employ our first member of staff in Vietnam. So Thuy here in the top right, this is her visiting a civet farmer in Vietnam on the border of Cambodia. So her background is zoonotic disease, risk pathways, and epidemiology. So we are working with local communities to really understand the risks involved in civet trade and to try and look for alternative farming practices. Whilst this is all to protect the conservation and the welfare of vivrids, it's also to protect local communities and the environment. So we're trying to work with people by speaking to them about what matters to them most, which is their livelihoods and the health of their families, both of which can actually be at risk from the trade that they're pursuing, thinking that it is that it's healthy and sustainable, which it isn't. So this is a very ambitious program. It's going to be at least 10 to 20 years before we're able to start doing mass rescues of civets from these institutions, because we need to develop a network of veterinary expertise, zoos in the country. We need to make sure that their welfare standards are increased so we can start rescuing these animals. And we also need to do a lot of preliminary research, including lots of work with local communities, including those that are trading civets. Now, this program includes consumer research, a demand reduction campaign, and Civet Forest School, which I'm really excited about because this year we've been trialing resources. Civet Forest School is going to be a kind of pop-up clinic that we will bring to border areas of national parks where the civets are being taken from. And we're primarily going to be working with very young children to really inspire them to want to protect civets. So we're creating that generation after generation change. So yeah, it's a huge project, but it's a very positive outcome off the back of our film. And the last thing I want to introduce is our newest campaign, which is going to launch next month. So you're getting an exclusive. We haven't showed this to anyone before. We're calling out the coffee industry. We are essentially saying to the coffee industry all over the world, look, we know your dirty secret, and it's civet coffee. Even if you don't endorse it, even if you don't sell it, even if you don't have any affiliations, although I think most coffee companies are linked in some way to Civet Coffee, they need to come together and start really confronting what is the stain of the coffee industry. So we have got all of our assets ready, and we will be heading out to the London Coffee Festival next month, where we will have a stand. We're going to be talking to consumers, we're doing more consumer-based research, and we're also going to be networking with all of the coffee retailers and traders at the event to try and get some partnerships going so that we can get an into that industry for real impact. So the documentary I'm going to show you now is called From Rare to Reckless. This was filmed in 2023 and launched in 2024. This film was created on less than 1% of a typical filming budget. Myself as the producer and my colleague Jack, the director, on the screen there, we travelled out to Vietnam. We spent 2 weeks tracking civet trade from the tourist perspective right the way through to the sanctuaries that are rescuing them. So I will give you a little warning that there is some footage that you may find distressing. We don't show anything explicit, we don't show anything gory, but of course it does involve animals in very poor welfare conditions. So I'm going to try and share this. Please give me a thumbs up or some sort of emoji if you can hear.
All good, I can hear it.
I first learned about Civet Coffee about 3 years ago, I think. And I was kind of shocked. First of all, it sounded horrible. Drinking coffee from beans that have been through the digestive system and pooed out by a civet. And then I learned more about it. And originally it was wild civets and people collected it from the forest. And as civets like coffee cherries, then that seemed okay. But then, of course, as demand grew, the exploitation began. It's obscene.
They're one of the most ancient families of carnivores to walk the planet, but they do so in almost complete secrecy. Civets are solitary, they're nocturnal, which makes them really tricky to observe in the wild, even though they are widely distributed across Asia and Africa. There's about 35 species, though no one really knows how many there are, because we have so little information on their genetics. And anatomically, they're just amazing. There is so much variation between each civet species. Mostly though, when I think of civets, I think of their curious little faces and their big, bright eyes.
Civet is a fluffy, cute, cat-like animal, very gentle animal, and they move very quietly and slowly, and it will melt your heart when you see her eyes. Civet are important for Vietnam for the economic, environment, and also the control as well. I think they deserve attention and love from people.
Civet is one of the really important species for the ecosystem. You know, like civet eats control some small animals, so that is really make balance for the ecosystem. They also eating the fruits, so they spread the seed to many different places. So it's contribute for like the growth of the forest. So without the civet, it's I think the big loss for the ecosystem.
Civet coffee is coffee that's been produced through the digestive tract of the civet. So they have a very specialised digestive tract, which is said to produce a very unique flavoured coffee because the digestive enzymes are said to alter the structural and the chemical characteristics of the coffee. So when it's then excreted out in their feces, you have a superior coffee. We see that civet coffee started to become more popular just after 2007. And that's because it was featured in a very famous Hollywood film at the time. And then it also was featured on some rather mainstream Western television shows. And so suddenly consumers were baffled by this product. Some were curious, some were disgusted. Everyone wanted to try it. So civet coffee is said to be the most expensive coffee in the world because it's meant to be the rarest coffee in the world. So the civet coffee industry would say that it's about 127 kilograms availability per year in the world. And the reason they say it's really rare is because the marketing claim is that farmers are going out into the fields, into the forest, and they are finding the civet feces. They then collect the feces, they'll pick the coffee beans, and then they clean those beans, they dry them, they roast them the same that you would with normal coffee. But it's not really rare because what's actually happening is they are caging civets en masse, and that's happening throughout Southeast Asia. In reality, there are hundreds of thousands of civets across Asia that are being force-fed coffee in confinement. And so they're producing civet coffee on mass scale.
The civet coffee industry is predicted to reach an annual net worth of 10.9 billion US dollars. Yet little research has been done to see what the impacts of this rapidly growing industry might be. And what little research has been done has focused on Indonesia. So this is why we wanted to head to Vietnam. Vietnam is a really interesting place to study civet coffee because it's really important for biodiversity. But also, Vietnam's civet coffee industry is still developing, and so we're still trying to understand the wider implications for conservation, animal welfare, and public health. To see how civet coffee is marketed to city tourists, we started our journey in Hanoi. We decided to visit cafes and stores selling civet coffee, and we also spoke to the tourists visiting them.
Tourism is not only about leisure travel and vacationing. Tourism includes all different types of travel motivations, and all of it around the world encompasses an enormous economic driver. The product in the tourism industry is the experience. And when tourists make decisions about their experiences that they're going to purchase, they're making a decision that affects the entire supply chain.
We found that tourists tended to have very little understanding of civet coffee trade beyond the surface level marketing, that civet coffee is pooped by an animal.
If you're planning a trip that clearly has some animal tourism element in it, do a bit of research before you actually accept that you are going to participate. Because obviously, if you are part of the audience, you're only encouraging what might not be a good welfare situation.
As individuals, like as the tourists ourselves, when we're traveling, I think the onus is on us to think critically about what we're consuming. I don't just mean consuming as in drinking coffee, but in any way, whenever we're interacting with wildlife, we should be reading up in advance. What is it actually? You know, if I'm about to interact or benefit from a wild animal in any way at all, whether that's coffee or riding an elephant or seeing a wild animal in captivity, what has that animal gone through to give me the end product? And coffee, civet coffee, Kopi Luwak is the same. It's really the same. People don't know.
To understand if civet coffee is part of Vietnamese culture,
we went to the National University of Economics.
I don't think that normal average citizen or normal average household will buy the civet coffee at home and drink and consume it. I don't think that. Normally, that's people going on a trip or on a tour or tourists with a high spending, they will try. Yeah.
We often take the case study of mass tourism as the most damaging activity of tourism to environment. Maybe it's not greatly, but they just don't know that they're doing something harmful to the environment.
Civet coffee was really popular in the main tourist hub of Hanoi. Coffee shops were everywhere, and each shop had row upon row of civet coffee available. But each shop had more civet coffee on display than the industry claims is available per year in the entire world. From the stores and the cafes that we visited, there was a lot of patchy information, but there was one key fact that was always consistent, and that was that civet coffee was not produced in Hanoi. All sources pointed instead to another area of Vietnam, Dalat. We were really interested in visiting Dalat because it's an area of Vietnam well known for its tourism. We also weren't really surprised when coffee shop owners in Hanoi were telling us to go to Dalat. We were already aware that Dalat was one of the central regions in Vietnam for civet coffee production. Dalat was a prime area of interest for our visit because we wanted to see the impact of tourism on civet coffee demand. We knew that civet coffee tours were happening in Dalat, but also we were aware that there was a much deeper and more insidious trade of civets happening throughout that region. So there was a key piece of research, and that was conducted by Save Vietnam's Wildlife. And the lead researcher on that paper was Mai Trinh, and Mai is one of the trustees of the Civet Project Foundation.
It's hard to say when, but based on the research that we do, the civet coffee seem to peak, and civet farm seem to peak from 2005 and 2010. We conduct some visit to 57 civet farms in 2 provinces in the Central Highlands. We chatted with the farm owner and observe how they practice raising the civets in their farm, and to check what is the impact of civet farming to the civet wild population, and also how it could spread the link with the biosecurity or zoonotic disease. In the end, we really found the very astonishing answers to the question. Yeah.
Their research showed that the conditions in civet coffee farms couldn't meet even the most basic of civet needs. Farms were often over capacity. Some of them housed several hundred civets each. Many of those civets they didn't have permits for. So we knew that civets were being taken from the wild in alarming numbers. Another issue was that biosecurity was completely lacking for all of those facilities. And so, civet coffee farming was a huge cause for concern when it came to zoonotic disease. Unfortunately, from what we found, the situation is still very much the same. Although we've been researching civet coffee production and civet coffee tourism for a number of years, it was really still very shocking to see the amount of suffering that this industry was causing. All bar one of the farms we visited had a very, very similar setup, which was very small cages which housed 1 civet each. Every single civet we observed had some sort of either behavioural issues such as pacing or self-mutilation, which are all really significant signs of stress. There were signs that they had previously been housed together, and so several were missing chunks of their ears.
There were high rates of malnourishment, which was to be expected given that these animals are rarely fed anything but coffee. But there were also cases of obesity, where the animals had refused to eat the coffee and so were starving. And so then in those cases, the farm owners would give them chicken broth or different types of very high sugar fruit which caused obesity, and still they would refuse to eat the coffee. All farms that we visited had disease concerns. There was no sign of biosecurity. So civets were often sat in their own feces. We had cases where urine was running across the floor. We had cases of domestic animals, all within a very, very close proximity to these civets that were coming from the wild, from all different areas of Vietnam potentially. And so we had a huge amount of opportunity for disease to spread. No thought given to the health of the workers that were going to be engaging with these animals, and certainly no thought as to the number of tourists that could possibly pick up disease and infection. The interactions that people are having in these tourist facilities with wildlife puts them at direct risk from zoonotic disease, but it also places the animals at risk. You think how many tourists are coming from all over the world. A simple cold to one tourist could be a death sentence to one of these animals. Facilities were also very aware of the tourist's desire to interact with animals and to have photographs of those interactions. So there were many cases where animals were used as nothing more than photo props for tourists to pose with.
Zoonotic diseases can be spread between wildlife and humans. They often have a reservoir in wildlife. These are diseases like rabies that can spill over to humans, or Ebola that can spill over to humans. And most recently, things like COVID-19. And civets are an animal that can carry zoonotic diseases. They've been known to carry some that have jumped over to humans. The SARS epidemic is a key example. And because of that, we should be very careful about regulating how people interact with civets. So whenever you take civets from the wild where they might have these diseases and bring them into close contact with humans, whether it's for wild meat trade or for civet coffee, you're going to have potential for zoonotic disease spillover.
One facility we visited had a walkthrough exhibit, and in that same facility, we saw a civet that was so ill with what looked to be symptoms of parvovirus that this animal looked like it was already dead. And we were free to touch everything in that enclosure that the animal had come in contact with. It was evidently clear in every single facility that we visited that civet coffee tourism has huge implications for human health. In several of the tours we visited, we also saw binturong, but binturong are listed as vulnerable to extinction on the IUCN Red List of threatened species, and so this species is not permitted to be housed for civet coffee. But when we spoke to the tour guides, we were told that binturongs were highly desirable for civet coffee production, specifically because they are larger than the palm civets, and so they could consume more, and they could then produce more. All of the farms we visited had signs that civets were being regularly captured from the wild. We saw snare injuries, including missing feet and open, bloody wounds. In all cases, it was clear these civets were newly captured because their injuries were fresh. Capturing civets in the wild to replace those that are dying in civet coffee farms and tours has huge implications for conservation. Not only does it mean that we're constantly seeing civets removed from their natural habitat, where they are serving a role for the ecosystem as seed dispersers and seed germinators,
But we're seeing huge numbers of snares being placed into the environment, simply in the hope that they catch civets. Snares are by nature indiscriminate. They're cruel because you don't know what's going to be walking through that snare. You don't know what species you're going to catch. And for every single civet that you might collect, how many other animals, how many other species have been caught in those traps? Indiscriminate snaring has been labelled by conservation scientists as an epidemic in Vietnam. We managed to get the contact details of 2 civet farm owners. Both told us that they could produce as much as 150 tonnes of civet coffee from a network of farms operating privately in the region. When we made contact with each of these owners, we did so under the guise of being international coffee traders. We asked them, firstly, if they could prove that they had the number of civets that would be required to create the many tonnes of civet coffee that they were claiming to be able to produce per year. Not only did the civet coffee owners respond to our request for further information, but they also sent through videos promoting the conditions of which they housed their civets. So this is the first farm where they said they could produce 150 tonnes?
Yes. And I asked her for more photos of their civet farms. They are connected to other civet farms around that city. And this is the condition, the close-up condition of the farm.
So this is the same farm that had 50 civets in that massive open air?
Yes.
Well, I say massive.
Yes. And they told us that the farm is like half wildlife, so the civet can have the best condition.
But there's no evidence there of any other food. So we have a footage of the sign on that farm that says to the tourists that there's this really strict feeding regime. And actually,
this is the reality.
This is the reality.
I think this is what they don't want us to see.
So what this means is that for every civet we saw in these tourism facilities, there was 10, 20, 30 more that were in much, much worse conditions that weren't being shown to the tourists. Whilst we were doing our undercover investigation, we were made aware of an associated industry, which was the sale of civets for their meat. In following those leads, we found an entire industry hidden in plain sight. Within an hour, we had found about 25 Facebook groups, all of which were dedicated to civet trade, and combined there was more than 145,000 active members. When we got access to those groups claiming that we wanted to buy civets, we were offered wild-caught civets of various species, including those that are listed as endangered. And all of those were traded for meat and for civet coffee. So this is really when it became clear that the civet coffee industry goes beyond coffee. It's linked to an entire network of animal trafficking. We desperately wanted to find the light at the end of the tunnel. We wanted to meet people working on the ground, protecting civets and their habitats. And so, we travelled to Cuc Phuong National Park to meet Save Vietnam's wildlife.
So Save Vietnam Wildlife is a local non-profit organization in Vietnam. So we work to stop the extinction and champion recovery of threatened species in Vietnam. So our work is more focused on, first is rescue animals from illegal wildlife trade, taking care of them and return them back to the wild. The second is we're doing the research in the field, understand how the chain of the population finding the rare and important species. We also is working to protect the habitats. So both like inside, we go to the patrol, remove snare, confiscate poacher, arrest the poacher. Outside, we work to improve law enforcement, and also is raise awareness, change behavior. We're also working with the Vietnamese government to change the policy and make sure the policy is support for wildlife conservation in the country.
One of the biggest threats to wildlife in the forest now is the snake traps. From 2018, we established the anti-poaching team, and then after 3 years working in the one national park in the central Vietnam, so we collected over 10,000 traps, 10,000 traps in the forest.
We focus on the group of the civet, like binturong, mark palm civet, common palm civet, Austin civet. Austin is one of the most beautiful animals, but because people often hunt them for the meat consumption and farming, many places in Vietnam, the Austin is already local extinct. So Vietnam Wildlife working first to rescue animals from illegal chase, develop the conservation breeding program, and we hope in the future we can recover the Austin civet in the wild. In some of the places they already missing.
There's always hope, and we must never ever give up. We've seen that with the bear bale industry at its height. 4,000 bears on farms in Vietnam, over 4,000 bears on farms in Vietnam, and we're now, within a handful of years, are going to end the industry. There's always hope, and we must not give up. Make no mistake, the road is long, but it has to start somewhere, and it can start with us, and it can start right now. It's better that we start now and we address it now, because in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we'll be saying that we're ending the civet coffee farming industry. There's always hope.
If I could give advice to the tourists, I would like to say, come to Vietnam, but not try to the civet coffee. There's so much more interesting and important cultural experience that you could try rather than just try something very tourist-driven.
If people hear about these things and want to try them, I would advise them first to really check and see what's behind this intriguing sounding substance. But it's pretty hard to investigate a supply chain unless you're prepared to go to the country, spend a lot of time and do some undercover work. So from every aspect, I think civet coffee should be a no-no.
Don't drink, don't buy the civet coffee. It's a way to protect the animal and the way to improve the animal welfare and make sure animal is not like bring like from the beautiful nature into the small cage and keep forfeit them.
So this is our last day in Vietnam, and we're reflecting on how the trip has been. One of the take-home messages that has come from all of our interviews with different professionals is that tourists are central to the civet coffee trade, and the civet coffee trade is central to animal exploitation. Now, one thing that our trip has highlighted is that there are lots of people working on the ground in different NGOs and different rescue, rehabilitation and release facilities that are doing wonderful, wonderful work to try and combat these industries. But it's a drop in the ocean, and everyone needs to play their part. This means you as the tourist, this means social media, this means tour operators. Everyone has a responsibility to make sure that this type of industry doesn't last. It's all well and good knowing to avoid a product or a tourist attraction if you are aware of the harms involved, but many tourists don't know. Only by being transparent about the impact of civet coffee upon animal welfare, conservation, and public health can tourists know to avoid this practice to begin with. That's why we're calling on TripAdvisor, the largest review site in the world, to formally label all civet coffee attractions that feature live animals as in breach of their own animal welfare policy. There are 3 key ways that you can help civets. Sign our petition, telling TripAdvisor to add an animal welfare warning to all civet coffee attractions. Speak up. If you see signs of poor animal welfare when you're travelling, please report it. Speak to your travel agent, leave a negative review. Reviews help to inform others. And most importantly, boycott civet coffee.
Hi, Jess, are you with us?
I am. Hello.
Wow, that was very intense, very educational, and I'd really like to thank you for sharing that with us. Um, I've got a question for you. Do you feel that, I mean, education is always key in these things, and TripAdvisor seems to be trying to do the right thing now. Do you see any avenues where travel agents, brochures that I know that it's a bit old school, that, when you go into a travel agent and they have these lovely glossy brochures there, about various tours and trips, that's another avenue to tackle, for educational purposes, because I love that things are moving, but they're moving so slowly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So where we are based, so UK and Europe, we don't have an awful lot of kind of walk-in estate agents, and if we do, they just direct us online. So I think there is definitely avenue for that. I would say actually Australia is probably a much more fruitful place for that type of intervention, because our research has shown that in Bali, for example, where civet coffee tourism is most prevalent, the number one international tourist is Australians. Whereas in Europe, it tends to be we're going to places like Greece or Spain. And yeah, so Bali is quite exotic for us to get to. So I'd be really interested to know what sort of marketing is encountered in Australia and New Zealand and places that are the kind of Western audience, but are much closer to where this civet coffee tourism is taking place, because you're one of the key demographics, not only for visiting when you're there, but actually being advertised those types of trips in advance. Yeah.
And also, how do you think zoos in Australia and New Zealand can help support the Civet project in regards to, I mean, I think most of us have Binturong, um, within the region, and I guess just advertising and promoting is one way that we might be able to, especially celebrating International Civet Project, on an annual basis. With that, that gets the message out there. So is that something that you guys have approached any zoos in our region about?
Yeah, so we have, yes, we would love for Australian zoos to take part in World Civet Day. My kind of big dream, if you like, is that for every zoo that houses a binturong, because binturong are the most popular viverrid in captivity, like in accredited zoos around the world. I would love for those posters that say they smell of popcorn to follow up with, did you know these animals are exploited for civet coffee? Did you know these are the lies that the industry is telling? Because a coffee that comes from the poop of an animal is engaging. So we can take that and run with it in a different narrative. And that's what we're trying to do with our campaigns, is to change that narrative and say, actually, civet poop is amazing because they're distributing seeds of the forest, and we need to keep the poop in the forest. We need to keep the animals in the forest. So we're trying to change that. But zoos are the most likely place most people will encounter a binturong or other civets. Even people from those range countries, civets are nocturnal, they're solitary, you're very unlikely, you might hear them in your roof, you might see one scuttling around in the treetops in your local park, but you're unlikely to get a look up close, even if you live with them on your doorstep. So a zoo is the prime place where people can fall in love with these animals and get that educational messaging that they need. In answer to your question about whether we've approached anyone or not, all of our efforts so far have been on Europe. And this year, this is like a third year in operation. This is when we're really trying to broaden that reach. So yeah, I would love anyone that wants to be an ambassador for the Civet Project, have signage up in their zoos. We have zookeeper talks and everything already scripted. Like, we have the resources available. Please come forward and request them. Yeah.
Well, I think definitely, sorry, I'll just jump in one more quickly thing. I think we absolutely could help in that space as the carnivore tag. So we will definitely be in touch. I'm going to hand you over because we've got a question here.
Thank you.
Well, no, I was actually going to say we host the Binturong managed program for the Zoo and Aquarium Association in Australasia. So probably it would be good to put Becky, who's the species coordinator. So I'm from Perth Zoo and we're the ones who host the program, but Becky is species coordinator and she unfortunately couldn't join today because we've had an emergency lion procedure. But I was wondering if you'd be happy for me to pass your details on to her for her to reach out to talk about, because in our managed programs, we have education goals that we set for those. So to talk about what those goals should be, but also potentially, I mean, this sort of seems to me like it would make a good topic for advocacy campaign in this region. You know, we've had Don't Palm Us Off and cats, keep your cats indoors for native wildlife and those sort of things. But I'm wondering that it sounds like there's good potential, given you're exactly right. We are the biggest component of the tourist market in a lot of these destinations. So we are really well placed to try and run that campaign. So yeah, I'd be, if you're happy, I'd be really keen to give Becky your contact details and have her reach out to discuss this a bit further.
Absolutely, please do. Yes, I'm more than happy for my email to be circulated. We're on all different social media channels. The only thing we're not on is X. So you know, find us online. It's usually me that's responding to messages, if not our communications officer. So any requests that come through for things like partnerships, advocacy campaigns, there's multiple ways you can reach me. But yeah, definitely, please, Sheila, share my email.
Yeah. Okay, I can send you Jess's email address, and I think that, you know, maybe we can, you know, like really push this through hard for next year. I mean, campaigns that are running. So I think it's really worthwhile and it's absolutely doable from our point of view.
I mean, that's honestly music.
Sorry, that's my naughty dog. Henry. Sorry. Well, I think Bex had to leave. She's got an animal thing too. Everybody's kind of just in and out. But thank you, Jess, again so much for your time. It was a very informative talk. I really appreciate it. We will absolutely share this far and wide with our community here, and hopefully people will be in touch to talk how they can help out in this amazing project. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome. Take care and get some sleep.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I will.
Thanks, Jess.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet
Bye,
you.
Jess.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.